Hello and welcome everybody to this session about the liberation of voice. My name's Helen Kenwright and I'm from the University of York, where I teach on the lifelong learning programme. I teach all sorts of creative writing courses there. I'm also creative writing lead and tutor support at Converge, which is at York St John University. And I run my own organisation called The Writing Tree. And there'll be more about all of those and a bit more about how I came to be doing all this as we go through, because it is relevant to today's topic. It took me a long time to get the title right for this session, because there are so many ideas coming together in what I want to say to you. But I think liberation of voice is so important in allowing people to speak and to be heard. In our world today, there's a lot of noise and not a lot of listening. And I feel really fortunate that in my line of work, I do get to listen to lots of voices. And of course, we learn from every conversation we have. And then creative writing, which is my passion, but also so important in helping people to make their voices heard. So I'm going to start off with a quote from Al Alvarez, The Writer's Voice, published 2006. Imaginative literature is about listening to a voice. When you read a novel, the voice is telling you a story. When you read a poem, it's usually talking about what its owner is feeling. But neither the medium nor the message is the point. The point is that the voice is unlike any other voice you have ever heard, and it is speaking directly to you, communing with you in a private, right in your ear and in its own distinctive way. So we all have our own voice, and we all have something to say. But the question is, who gets to speak? I'm sure we all know about voices that we hear very often in our own lives, and they may not necessarily be the ones we want to hear. Some of us are fortunate that we do get to speak, like all the presenters who've presented at the Festival of Ideas, and our lovely participants who've come along and contributed their views as well. There are a lot of people who don't get to speak and aren't heard, and that's the focus of our attention today. A bit about how I managed to find my voice through a very short biography as a writer. To begin with, I had permission. When I was 8 years old, I was playing with my toy ponies on the living room carpet, like you do. I was obsessed with pony books, and I was making up my own as I arranged this gymkhana in the living room. And my mum was doing the ironing, and I said to her, "How old do you have to be a writer?" And she thought for a moment, and then she said, "Well, you probably have to be 16 to sell anything, but until then you can start practicing." And funnily enough, that felt like a revolutionary moment, the idea that one day I could be a writer, and that I had the permission to start now without anybody telling me to. When we go through schooling, we're encouraged to write in class for a specific purpose, but that doesn't necessarily give you the permission as a young person to write outside class until you encounter it for yourself. And I was very fortunate to have encouragement in my writing from my school teachers and from my parents and my friends as well. As a teenager, I fell into transformative fiction, which sounds very posh and sociological, but actually it's fan fiction. It's writing fiction based on something that somebody else has created. In my case, it was the Bay City Rollers, and I wrote fan fiction about the Bay City Rollers and shared it with my classmates, and they shared theirs with me, and we all just reveled in this fictional world we could create together. And fan fiction has been my comfort blanket ever since. I still, at moments of stress, I write fan fiction because it's easy and it's fun, and you know somebody's going to appreciate it at the end of the day, and that you will be heard. When I went to university, that permission to write creatively was withdrawn, or I felt it was withdrawn. I was in not very positive relationships, and people who told me that my writing was silly and not worth paying attention to. And when somebody tells you that, it cuts deep. And with me, as my late teenage self, it definitely cut deep. And I stopped thinking about creative writing. Instead, I turned to academia, and I wrote all the usual things that we write in universities, exams, papers, eventually a PhD. I ended up working in research in further education. And although from time to time I'd break out a little bit by running classes in how to write reports in a creative way, which is probably the beginning of my teaching career that I have now. Mostly it was about research, which I also loved. But then I found myself going back into fan fiction, and I was encouraged this time by those around me to explore my creative writing wings. And I took a couple of creative writing classes. You could do evening classes in those days, which was nice. And started to rebuild myself as a writer. And then one day, my world came to a crashing halt. I'd already been made redundant by this point, so I didn't have any paid work, and my husband, who's been fighting cancer for 6 years, died. So everything that I knew about me had stopped. And over the next few years, I needed to rebuild myself and find out who I was again, as anybody going through a bereavement does. And I turned back to writing. Specifically, I took the MA in creative writing at York St John. And through that, I've opened doors to where I am today. I was very privileged at various stages in this journey to be able to do these things. I had support, I had education behind me, and although my mental health has never been brilliant, it never got the better of me to the point where I stopped writing. After my MA, I again, with that extra permission and the voice, I wrote all the things. I was published for the first time. I've written novels. I still write fan fiction. I've written all the things. But even better than that, in some ways, I've been able to celebrate the joy of writing with others, because I realised through my master's experience and through that experience of overcoming bereavement that writing can be such a help to people. I wanted to share that with others. And that's why I started the Writing Tree, which is dedicated to the support and nurturing of creative writers. We've been running since 2011 and have become much more active in the last 10 years. And we offer tuition, e-format conversion, editing services, and we publish work by local community groups and sometimes other new writers. But our main focus isn't for people who have access to other routes to publishing. For example, I'm working with a lovely lady at the moment who's in her 80s and wants to write a novel that she can leave in published form for her children and grandchildren. So she's self-publishing it, and I'm helping her to do that by mentoring her and offering editing and things. So all those writers out there, which I believe probably outnumber published authors by a significant amount, who might want their book in print, but they're not trying to sell it or to make a career out of it. They just want to share. Our guiding principles are that creative writing has an importance independent of the subject of the writing or the purpose or audience, but everybody has the right to write and to write what they want to write. And we also publish creative writing heals for Converge. So let's talk a bit about that as well. I'll put my web address in there if anybody wants to look up the Writing Tree. You can also Google us, and we usually show up depending on the quirks of AI on the day. Now, Converge, I started volunteering for Converge when I was doing my MA. It's a partnership between York St John University, where it's associated with the Institute of Social Justice, and mental health services. We provide a range of courses for students who've got lived experience of mental illness, and they can either be referred by services or they might refer themselves. We take people's word for it. It's not up to us to decide whether anybody has a worthy diagnosis of joining Converge. If somebody's got lived experience of mental ill health, then they're very welcome to come along. Our ethos is students, not service users. We find that many people with mental health experience have become also institutionalized, either through being in hospital or other services, but their focus is very often on their mental health and not on other aspects of their lovely selves. And what we're about isn't therapy with a big T, it's about providing education, which happens, in my view, to be therapeutic with a small t for anybody. This academic year, we've had over 310 students engaged in more than 25 different courses. We offer all sorts of courses, including origami, improv comedy, music theory, research methods. We very often provide parallel courses to the wider university or universities, because we also work with students from the University of York who can provide classes for us. And this year we've had 50 creative writing students who've studied on 5 different courses, including campus, online and postal versions. So we really try and reach the student where they are. If they don't feel they can come out of the house, then they can do work by post. If they feel they can come online, we can meet them there. And if they want to come onto campus, they can do that. The principles of Converge, which are really important because that underpins how we in creative writing work with our students to give them a voice. We work together as artists and students. So our students are considered to be artists while they're with us. It's not just student tutor. So we try and flatten hierarchies wherever we can. To build a community where we learn from each other. And that includes across different departments as well, within students and tutors and so on. To engage and enhance the university and wider community, we have lots of volunteers who come from York St John who are undergraduates or postgraduates who come along as volunteer tutors or to support classes or just to come and learn alongside our students to give them more of that university experience. To provide a supportive and inclusive environment, and that is an academic university environment. So it's all the things you would expect from university teaching, but we try and make it particularly safe for our students so that they can feel comfortable and fully engage. Respect others and value yourself. The second part of that is often more difficult for our students than the first. And above all, be ordinary, be extraordinary, and be yourself. And this is where it gets exciting because Converge works. And every year I have students at the beginning of the year who are nervous, perhaps feel they're not going to last very long on the course. Perhaps they've had other bad experiences of learning in the past. They don't want to talk about their writing. They don't want to share it. Sometimes they tell you up front, I don't think I'll be able to say till the end of the session, in which case we say, that's fine. If you need to step out, you need to step out. And then at this time of year, when I'm getting pieces together for the anthology, I am dealing with confident writers who can talk to me about their work, about what they want to do over the summer. They've made friends. They really change. You can see people blossoming, which is an amazing privilege. And this is one of the reasons why that is important. I want to talk a little bit of sociology now. And that's around the concept of othering. According to the International Encyclopedia of Human Geography, othering is a process of creating a distinction between an in-group and an out-group by emphasizing differences, leading to stigmatization of the out-group based on stereotypes and hierarchies, ultimately reinforcing the identity of the in-group. The term itself was coined by Gayatri Spivak in her work on colonialization. You can obviously see how it would come to play there. It also has its roots in philosophy and sociology through Hegel, Goffman, labeling theory and all those other sociological concepts. I like the term othering because it says it exactly as it is. And it's absolutely endemic in our society, from the smallest places to the global landscape at the moment. It comes usually from a place of fear, where one group is frightened of the challenge of another group. And fear and discrimination and othering is a very dangerous thing for everybody, in my view. The other concept I want to tie in with this is Fricke's work on hermeneutical injustice, and two concepts in particular that she talks about in her book Epistemic Injustice. There's testimonial injustice, which is where someone's not believed. So usually the lack of belief is based in some part of their identity, such as their race or gender, or indeed mental health. For example, if I maybe 10, 15 years ago, especially, if I took my car to the garage as a woman and I tried to explain to a mechanic what was wrong with it, I might get a bit of a pat on the head and a "don't worry dear, we'll sort it out." Despite the fact that actually my dad was a motor mechanic and I can take engines apart. Well, I could then, I can't do it now because it's all computers. But I'm perfectly capable of dealing with a combustion engine. But assumptions are made, and it may not be a malicious thing, but nonetheless, it's assumed that other group doesn't know, and therefore they're not believed. It's certainly true of people who are suffering from poor mental health, and it's often true in institutions such as the National Health Service, where there's a tendency to believe or not believe depending on rank and experience and so forth. Hermeneutical injustice, on the other hand, is where people can't interpret, make sense of, or understand their experiences because in some way or another the words aren't there or accessible to that person to adequately describe them. So they don't have the tools to express themselves. And that can happen when experiences are so marginalized and separate from others that the language just doesn't develop. Her main example for this is domestic violence and coercive control, where a person loses their sense of self so much that they can no longer really articulate how they're feeling. There just aren't the words to express it to others who haven't been in that place. So I'm going to have a little pause now, so you don't get too tired of my voice. I'd like you to just think about any instances where you felt othered or noticed othering in others. It's important to write about these things, I think, rather than just think about them. Something happens in our brain when we write about important issues. It can really help us to understand things better. And one of the reasons that I think having the skills of creative writing can help us to understand and live better in the world. Amira says, I've had personal experience with othering on multiple levels, gender and sexuality, mental health and neurodivergence. In a world that it's very important, for example, to maintain eye contact, I find it extremely uncomfortable, but I'm forced on a daily basis to do it. That's just one example. Thank you, Amira. That's so important. I think sometimes it feels as though if there's one tiny excuse for people to not take notice of you, then they'll use it. And although, yes, for some of us, eye contact is an important part of our language, it isn't for everybody. And if somebody can only speak French, you don't expect them, or you shouldn't expect them to suddenly speak English. We have to find a common language between whoever we're speaking with. But for some reason, that doesn't seem to be acceptable. Everybody is expected to either conform or become other. My own experience of othering, or one of them, was the clearest one I've had is when in my late 30s, early 40s, I discovered that we couldn't have children. And it was at a time when my whole social group were having children. And it wasn't a deliberate othering on their part, but we just didn't have anything in common, and they didn't understand what it was like from my point of view. So things fell apart. And I started to think, well, who am I if I can't have children and join this kind of the majority of the population who have that family experience? And who's my tribe, I suppose, it was the kind of feeling that I had then. People make a lot of assumptions about you if you don't have children, and I felt very excluded and othered at that point. And I turned to writing as my comfort as usual. And this was in the early 2000s, so the internet was just starting to become a thing. And I suddenly realised that having not been able to share what I wrote since school days, I could now post it online and other people could comment. And at first I thought I'd just post one and see what happens, and then I'll run away and hide. But what I had was a very warm reception, and the people who I found were commenting on my work, and then I could share that, I could read their work. We all had a lot of things in common, and we formed an online community. And these are a couple of the comments I've had. The first one is the very first comment I ever had on a website about my writing. And the reason I included that is because the person who posted it is now a close personal friend. She teaches in WashU University in the States. Every other summer she comes over and gives talks on Shakespeare to my students. And we've seen each other through a lot of times in the last 25 years. I've made lots of friends who then became in real life friends through writing online. And the other one is the most recent comment I've had, which was somebody saying that she read something I'd written back there right when I started online, and it had stayed in her mind ever since. And this is something really special for writers, I think, to know that you can have an impact on somebody and that your writing can comfort them or make them think, creates a bond. It helps to reduce those fears and barriers between you. And of course, you meet people from all sorts of groups that otherwise you wouldn't encounter, which is always enriching. I've got another example here from Haveza. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Forgive me if I haven't. Who says, I'm othered because of faith and culture, and also because of rare disease, and also the use of mobility aids. It's a sad state in the world where no one others because I wear glasses or use a reader pen to read. Humans are excluding us from the norms of society, and it is detrimental to our well-being in a world where we are seen and not heard. I turn to open mic and talk about this very thing, especially as a Muslim woman in hijab. Thank you so much for sharing that. And another example of othering, but I really like how you've brought out that sense of loss there, because it's not just the loss of the person who's being othered, it's the loss of the people who are othering, because they're depriving themselves of your contribution to society and your person, and all that you have to contribute. So thank you. And thank goodness for writing, because when we write, we can find our audience, we can find people who do understand and want to hear and relate to us. So mental ill health specifically, with othering. And these are some of the things that my students have said to me about their experience of not having a voice, of having that sense of being othered. It's hard to have a voice when you're ill. And I think that's true, whatever your illness, you know, your energy is going to restoring yourself and to looking after yourself and protecting yourself. You may not have the resources to speak out. Also, especially with mental illness, there's often a component of anxiety. And anxiety and fear silences us because, again, your body is shutting things down so it can focus on protecting you, enabling you to run or to hide. Sometimes that has a really physical component where your throat will close and you literally can't speak. So it's easy to underestimate the power that kind of reaction from your mind and body can have, and how it can actually isolate you in a way that perhaps is the worst possible thing for your recovery. Other people decide what's real, what's right, and what's going to happen next. I find that with a lot of my new students, especially if they have been through services for a long time, or perhaps had an intense period in hospital. And because of the nature of mental ill health and its relation to perceptions of reality and understanding, it is, you know, for example, if somebody is sectioned and taken into care, that's against their wishes usually. And they are then controlled for their own safety, but they are controlled. So they're giving up their own self-control, and that can bring in all sorts of uncertainties about what's going to happen. In cases of psychosis, people might challenge the person for what they can actually see and hear, and tell them they're not seeing and hearing those things. Very fundamental. And if other people are deciding those things about you, then who are you? Who do you decide you are? And never mind saying what you might want to say. Our media tells us mental illness is difficult for the NHS and other services. Well, it's difficult for us too, but we don't get to talk about it. When I first heard this, I thought, well, hang on a minute. I'm sure I love documentaries. I'm sure I've seen documentaries about people's experiences of mental ill health. But then when I went back and thought about it, this person's absolutely right, that most of those documentaries are about treatment, or they're about emergency services and how they cope with people who are mentally ill, or they're aiming at policy change. All very worthy in their own right, but they very, very often lack the true voice of the person who's undergoing that experience. And especially not just about their mental health, but about the rest of their lives and who they are. They're narrowed down to their diagnosis and their symptoms and the problem they present society. People are frightened of our experience. They don't want to hear it. And remember what we've been saying about othering, that it comes from a place of fear. For as long as records have existed, people have feared madness. In the medieval times, it was biblically associated with evil and demons, still is, unfortunately, in some places. Even in contemporary times, there's a pressure to be well and to show that you're well. And any signals that somebody isn't well, again, promotes fear and uncertainty. Either people are frightened because they don't understand, or they're frightened because it might happen to them. And unfortunately, instead of inquiring and finding a place of safety within knowledge, they withdraw. And I have to include some Foucault because I'm a sociologist at heart. And I think his writings on mental illness, although perhaps they've lost a little bit of relevance over the years, are still really, really important. Madness and Civilization. And Foucault says, in the serene world of mental illness, modern man no longer communicates with the madman. On one hand, the man of reason delegates the physician to madness, thereby authorizing a relation only through the abstract universality of disease. On the other, the man of madness communicates with society only by the intermediary of an equally abstract reason, which is order, physical and moral constraint, the anonymous pressure of the group, the requirements of conformity. So madness is acceptable if it's not noticeable and you can function in society. And how many people in the world have not been treated because their disease is considered functional? That's another talk for another year, but that's a thought. But that first section where society can't cope with mad people, so they hand them over to the medical profession to make them better, to make them acceptable again to society. And you might say, yes, that was then. I mean, that was a long time ago now, the 60s. We've learned a lot since then. There's been a lot of research and theorising. Surely it's different. There was a survey done in Scotland in 2022, the Scottish Mental Illness Stigma Study. And they found that 92% of their respondents with mental illness had experienced stigma in relationships with family and friends. 53% had lost self-respect, and 82% felt that others would not want to be their friend. Would not want to be their friend. That's your most basic form of othering. That you can't be my friend while you're being yourself because I don't like the way you are in your illness. I want to take a little break from the really heavy stuff for a minute and just think about how writing can help with all these things and also help people to manage their mental health. I want to talk a bit about what your brain does when you're writing. Lots of occupational therapists use writing in a therapeutic with a capital T way to help people to deal with trauma, to express themselves and all those things. But for any writer, this is the kind of thing that happens when you're actually in the process of writing. And yes, people did strap people up to electrodes and all those other things that psychologists do when they're looking at brains. So your frontal lobe, which is responsible for making choices and decisions about what you're writing and how, so that lights up straight away. And I notice with my students, especially if they have had a long period of mental health problems, they find it difficult to make choices and decisions. Again, when you're in a state of fear, the only choice is about life and death. You're not thinking about the nuance of where you want your plot to go next. The hippocampus accesses memories so that you can convey ideas. A lot of creative writing work, especially in beginner classes, is about observing detail, making associations with things that you can write about, creating imagery. So it's using those memories and your own experience to create your particular view. Then there's the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, which are about language and storytelling. Those are the bits that develop when we're told stories as children, and that develop with every book we read or write. And the Wern visual cortex, which is about seeing the story. So that's about thinking up a story in your head, where you just think you can imagine it without it being on words. Some people might imagine it in pictures, some in thoughts or words, but it's that imagining a story point. It's what I was doing with my ponies back in the day on the carpet there. Experienced writers, though, tend to use Broca's and Wernicke's areas more because they go from visualizing a story to narrating. They move from the thinking it up to going into the storytelling. The motor area is the physical act of writing, sadly usually associated with poor posture, and I need to just sit myself up straight for a minute there. Well, I remember that. But it's your fingers on the keyboards or your hands with your pen, and there is a pleasure in that part of writing as well. You know, fresh ink in a new notebook will never get old. There's a caudate nucleus. Now, this is where processes concerned with extensive practice live. And this part coordinates other bits of the brain to improve function on repetition. So it's what's going on when you're learning musical scales on an instrument and you get better over time. As more of those components of that action are automated, and then you can think more about the next bit and so on. When writing, this area is much more active in experience than novice writers, which is why I can always say to my students with confidence, the more you write, the better you'll get, because there's a huge element of practice, especially if you add some reflection in there as well. And then there's the amygdala, my nemesis, the amygdala, which is in charge of our emotions, and importantly is what sends alarms out when you are under threat, or it thinks you're under threat. Now that can get in the way of writing. It's difficult sometimes to focus on writing when you're in any kind of extreme emotional state. But if you can do it, it can help to calm dysregulation. There's nothing like, if you're really angry, to write a strongly worded letter and get that emotion out on the page, and then you can think calmly about what you actually want to do. And it may be to send that letter, but it may not be. Your emotions are calm, so you can have your thoughts back again. And it's how working in writing can work in trauma treatment to help people to express things almost as they would to a therapist, to have that non-judgmental audience of your page to put things on. And the physical process of writing and the engagement of those other parts of the brain when they can come online can also help to calm you down. Of course, our feeling of emotion also gives us empathy, so it helps us to be creative in our writing and to write, for example, characters. So how does all this benefit my students in Converge? I honestly think the most important thing of all is the sense of community, that they can come to a class in the same way as I went online to my fan fiction friends in the early 2000s. They can come to my class and they can meet other people who enjoy a thing they enjoy, and they can build a community together. They have shared interests with other students beyond their mental health. Quite a few of them have had experience of being in support groups for their mental health, which is one thing. But this is an interest group where they can put that to one side and enjoy other aspects and other interests. Quite often it might be picking up things that they did a lot before they lost their health. Having a purpose for themselves. We did an evaluation project a couple of years ago, and one of the quotes that really sticks with me was from somebody who said, 6 days of the week I struggled to get out of bed, and then the other day of the week there's Converge and I'm up at 8 with a cup of tea ready to go. But also a purpose to help others. We found in that same study that people would, that we have our York St John volunteers who are there to help our students to perhaps learn how to be students, to help them get over any confidence problems they have, to encourage them, and sometimes to teach them. But a lot of those volunteers are very young people. They're they're undergraduates, 18 to 21. And while they may be great at writing, they may really struggle with some of their life experiences, perhaps looking for careers or managing relationships. Our students have a wealth of life experience that they can share. So it's a two-way process. Everybody gets confidence and help out of it. They have an identity as students, which is separate from their identity or diagnosis due to their mental health. And there's a lot in the student identity. It has that sense of belonging to a community, to a respected community. It has a bit of kudos. We encourage our students to remember they are part of the university, and they can use the library and they can use all the spaces and go to the free lectures and all the other things that other students do. But it also has that sense that you're investing in your own future and your own growth, which is really important. They can have an identity as a writer or an artist or performer, or as a scholar, researcher, whatever it is they're involved with in Converge. And they can extend that into the wider community. I have a student who's just finished this year who's going to do an internship at Oxford University as a mental health advocate, as a writer in residence. I have students who then go on, obviously, to do undergraduate and postgraduate degrees as well. So it widens things out. It gives them a sense of empathy and a chance to empathise. They're not so isolated. They can empathise with other people who have, followed a similar journey to themselves, and self-worth, because it's not just about their diagnosis, it's about other areas that they can see they're learning and growing in. And it gives them the chance to make friends in ways that they perhaps wouldn't have done otherwise, not just with other people who've got that lived experience of mental ill health, but with tutors and other people that they meet through the course. So how does all this come together with finding their voice? This workshop wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for a reflective exercise that I did with my students. And it's one that I do regularly with my mentees as well in my practice through the writing tree. And it's really just a quite a basic, fundamental time to think about what the purpose of writing is. I'd like you to write for 3 minutes about why you write, if you are a writer. So why do you write? What's the purpose of your writing? Or if you don't write at the moment, why might you like to write? What benefit could you see from it? Margaret says, write to build the world, to create the world, to understand the world, to sort out my thoughts, to drain my brain, to express joy and pain, to externalize, to internalize, to memorize, to memorialize, to share the world, the understanding, to warn, to advise, to share the abundance of laughter and sorrow, to make sense, make time, to slow the world, to hold the world, to make myself. That's beautiful, Margaret. That's very poetic. And yes, all those eyes words, that's really interesting, isn't it? Amira says, I write fan fiction and original fiction. I write because I love the act itself. It's an act of creation, of creating something out of nothing. It also helps me in feeling connected to other people who might share the same ideas or find it interesting enough to argue against it. But I mostly write for myself, to self-soothe, if nothing else. Yeah, self-soothing is definitely a huge asset of writing. Jeanette says, I used to write to let stuff out. So a lot of it makes more sense looking back. I wrote about being imprisoned or the big bad wolf. Yes. Yeah, definitely. To let stuff out. And it is interesting. If you keep a journal and read it back over the years, I think that could be incredibly interesting and helpful. So let's see what my Converse students said. To represent people who've had experiences like me, to wake people up to what's happening, to change things. And this really surprised me because usually when I do this with mentees or with other students, I get very similar replies to those written in the chat today. But there was something about these comments that made me think there's a real drive there to use their writing to help and to raise an alarm in a way, to explore and express things long hidden. Again, that more kind of introspective thing, which I'm familiar with, to tell people what it's really like. And I don't know, I just like writing about dragons, which I can definitely empathize with. They can say the things I can't. Isn't that interesting? So a real drive to have a voice and to say things in the world, and to change things, hopefully to change things, but to enter a conversation. And sometimes that's as themselves, and sometimes it can be in the guise of dragons, which I really love. A couple more from the chat. Michael says, I feel a compulsion to write because I need to understand, and I can only come to an understanding through writing and rewriting. I definitely empathize with that. My brain doesn't often work until I've got a pen in my hand. Glenn says, to come home to myself. That's lovely, Glenn. Yeah, definitely that. And this is where the identity factors come in, I think. Often with our writing, that's our conversation with ourselves in private. It's where we create that intimate relationship with our own self. So another 3-minute write, and then I'll start talking again so you can have a rest of the pen. What might stop you or another person from writing? Amira says, for me, it happened twice already in my mid-20s because of burnout. Oh, burnout, yes. And now in my late 30s because of bereavement. Since the death of a loved one in January, it's been difficult to write. Yes. I think sometimes it can stop because you don't have the brain space for it. Certainly with bereavement, there sometimes needs to be space before you're able to come back to writing, or you need to write something else or something like that. Burnout can be really, really difficult because then you are working on scant resources. If you want to get writing again in either of those situations, my advice is to take it in tiny, tiny chunks. So just write a sentence a day, but think about the sentence and enjoy writing it. Perhaps doodle around it. Just give yourself that little space. And then a couple of weeks later, perhaps try writing 2 sentences. So take it really, really tiny and build up. And perhaps do things like writing classes where there's no pressure for you to write, but you can still feel the benefit of that community. So can you be a writer when? This is an extension of the question I asked my mum. And what my students often say is that they can't be a writer because of something to do with their writing. That's usually the block they have, apart from the ones about, to do with actually having the emotional and physical resources to write. I don't think this is what you want. I get this quite a lot around this time of year when I've been doing the anthology. A student will say, I've written something, but I don't think it's what you'll want for the anthology. To which I always say, well, it's not up to me to decide what I want for the anthology. It's you who gets to choose what to write. Nobody wants to read this. And this is perfectly timed with Michael's comment in the chat. Michael says, inner self-critical voices which say no one wants to hear what I have to say, the grinding difficulty of trying to express myself clearly, the frustration of the struggle to say something clearly with imprecise words. That inner critic, always on the shoulder. Everybody who's ever told you that there was something wrong will leap on you when you try and write, and tell you all the things that are wrong with it. And that's why having a community to get you over those fears and that critical voice can be so helpful. Yes, nobody wants to read this. Well, in a sense, that doesn't matter as long as you want to write it. I'm no good at writing, which is that inner voice exactly. That's that self-criticism trying to hold you back. Most of these kind of phrases and that inner self-critical voice is actually trying to protect you. It's another part of your fear system, which is trying to hold you back from possible criticism. So they'll give you the worst case scenario, just like they do, when you go to drive the car and you think you're going to crash, whatever. It's that same process. It's trying to protect you from being othered in a way. So you have to treat yourself with compassion and remember that very often those catastrophic thoughts don't come true. I can't write, I'm dyslexic. This one always makes me very angry because it often comes from a place where somebody has had experience at school of being told that because they have dyslexia, they can't write. And it might mean they have trouble with spelling and grammar and punctuation. But in my experience, they are the most amazing storytellers. There's something about the way neurodivergent brains work, which is so refreshing and interesting and can bring new things into our creativity. But for some reason, many schools in the past have tamped them down and said, no, this isn't for you. Why don't you go and do something physical instead? So I don't accept any of those as reasons not to write. I think they're probably reasons that you maybe should be writing. This is one of those students who gave one of those reasons. I won't say which reason it was they gave. This is My Darkness Holds Me Tightly by Cheryl Cunningham. My darkness holds me tightly, never wanting to let go, an endless loop of past trauma and pain haunting my very soul. Memories are tainted, truth distorted by time. Pictures hide the honesty, photos painted by lies. The voices are always talking, a radio no one else can hear. Sometimes they're like a whisper, comfort in my ear. Shadows appear around me, some flash before my eyes. Others stand with no movement or sound, makes me want to close my eyes. I'm locked in my body, all these emotions live here with me, too much for one person to hold. I bury all the anger deep within, scared of it breaking free. If it bursts, the amount of hurt could make a monster out of me. Smile to hide the chaos. I wear my opposites so well. But when I'm home and alone, I put the mask in a box beneath the bed. Distraction is my best friend. In nature, I feel free. Good days are precious, few and far between. So I spoke to this student for some time because she was worried that other people wouldn't want to read about her experience of depression. For me, it's a validation that, yes, this person has also had bad days. Human beings have bad days and have difficulties and have reasons to be that they are excluded by others. But that experience is valid and it helps me to understand mine better. And that's going to be published in our next anthology, which will be available from Amazon from December. This is another one of those reluctant authors who felt that they didn't have the right to write or to be published. This is an excerpt from a longer piece called Runner Beans and Rubbish by Robin Greenwood. I looked up and froze. Staring straight at me was a deer, standing side on, with its head pointing towards me and its ears up at 10 to 2. It had been crossing the bottom of the woods and stood now in the fringe of wild grasses before the reed marsh, with a large sycamore tree to each side. The leaves on their low-hanging branches, hid backlit by the sun, shone like little green lanterns around it. I thought, you beauty. I was on a well-beaten dirt trail through the woods. I had been focusing on the ground just ahead of my feet, placing them carefully to brake myself against running down the steep slope, when I had paused and looked up. After about 20 seconds, she took 2 graceful little bounds and was gone among the greenery. I don't know about you, but I think that's beautiful, and I really enjoyed reading it. So, you know, my advice to you and to all my students is always, if you have that feeling of inner doubt, just think, well, it might mean something to somebody. I don't know. We never know what other people will make of our writing. All we know is the pleasure we can have in creating it, if we can just put those voices to rest. And to help other writers to put those voices to rest. This is one of my favourites, and I'll show you the response I always have to it. Nobody wants to hear about depression or anxiety or what psychosis really feels like. Even my doctor didn't. They just wanted me to stop it. That's a very genuine feeling by a lot of people with mental ill health. But then when you look at the body of literature of our culture, it's everywhere. Consider Shakespeare's Sonnet 29. When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, the troubled deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least, yet in these thoughts myself almost despising, haply I think on thee, and then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from southern earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, and then I scorn to change my state with kings. So if Shakespeare can write about these things, why can't anybody else? This is another one. This is from Marion Keyes' book, The Mystery of Mercy Close. And this is a it's a romance book, really. Which makes I'm always fascinated by her work, because she manages to marry if you'll pardon the pun, a happy ending romance with a lot of discourse about mental health. There was a petrol station coming up on the left, the red sign of refreshment hanging invitingly in the sky. I would extricate myself from this gridlock and go in and buy a donut, but the donuts they sold in those places were as tasteless as the sponges you find at the bottom of the ocean. I'd be better off just washing myself with one. Besides, a swarm of huge black vultures was circling over the petrol pumps, and they were kind of putting me off. No, I decided, I'll hang on and wait a minute. Vultures in a city at a petrol station. I took a second look, and they weren't vultures, just seagulls, ordinary Irish seagulls. And then I thought, oh no, not again. So of course we do talk about mental health, and everybody has the right to write about their mental health. In encouraging my students to write, I often use this from Stephen King's On Writing, a Memoir of the Craft, possibly one of the most famous writing books ever written. And he says, now comes the big question, what are you going to write about? And the equally big answer, anything you damn well want, anything at all, as long as you tell the truth. And this is surprisingly difficult, I find, for people who are recovering from mental illness, because they haven't been able to tell their truth. They're worried that people don't want to hear it. And they might struggle to hit it head on, but there are ways around that. People instead write what they think other people want to read or hear. And I always think the best literature in the world comes from somebody with an experience they want to share that's a truth to them. They may tell it in all sorts of different ways, but it's the truth that reaches from one person to another. And the story I'm going to tell you now is about one of my students called Chad, and his response to that point when he was in my class. Chad had been to many Converge classes in all sorts of different subjects. He does great improv comedy and stand-up. And he found writing difficult because he didn't do very well with English at school. And mostly he used to write nice stories about going down to the pub or about his experiences working in a factory. But last year he told me he wanted to, after I'd shown that quote to the class, he said he wanted to write something different. And he wrote a very moving piece, which I'm going to read to you in a minute. But he also said, after he'd written that piece in the summer, so a couple of months after, he said this to me: writing reclaimed my own experience. It was theirs before. I didn't get a say. They told me who I was, mad, violent, and ill. I couldn't have written it before. I didn't have the skills, the tools. I can't even talk about it now. But after 3 years learning in class, I could put it down on a piece of paper. It was so hard, though. It was a physical act. I was shaking with all the anger I'd held in. Did you see? But now it's there on a piece of paper. I'm done. I can move on. It's like a weight got lifted from my shoulders. I've been a different man. And that's absolutely true. I was with him while he was writing a lot of this, and he did shake. And on several times, I reminded him he didn't have to do it if he didn't want to, and that he can take breaks and look after himself. But he was determined to go through this process. And this is what he wrote. There's two different speakers, as you'll see from the italics. Hi, Chad. Oh, no, not again. Tell us why we brought you here. Oh, we brought you here to see how you are. We hear you're poorly again, aren't you? You had a fight with a junior doctor, and he won't press charges if you admit that you're a danger to yourself and others. Oh, no, not again. You said you'd listen the last time. Oh, no, not again. Not you again. All I know is I took the dog out at Abby's, and when I got back, there was an ambulance waiting to take me. Why can't I take the dog out? Oh, no, not again. It's every time I start to do things for myself and get my life back from the last time this happened. Oh, no, not again. Oh, no, not again. You've got to stop this now. This violence has got to stop. The doctor was just doing his job. He deserves better. Chad, what were you thinking? Tell the truth. You're not treating anyone else like this. I'll see to it. This has to stop. Oh, no, not again. Oh, no, not again. When are you going to listen to anyone other than your team? The doctor said I was ill and gave me 80 milligrams of olanzapine, and I ended up in hospital with deep vein thrombosis. I'm accountable for my actions in everything, but he seems to be able to do and say anything with no consequence whatsoever. It's happening again. Oh, no, not again. Oh, no, not again. Chad, you'll have to see we're not your enemy. We're trying to help. You just have to start to trust in our team and believe you will get better. Never again will you get the chance to hurt one of our team. Oh, no, not again. Why? Come on, you bastards. Tell me why this happens every time. I take my life back from being told how to think and feel. I will be free of a doctor that read a file on me. I want a doctor, a proper doctor to see me. Oh, no, not again. Oh, no, not again. Oh, no, not again. I believe I can achieve the life I need, deserve. And yes, I will be your consequence, and I will fight for my life again. Oh, no, not again. You say you want to be free, but you're not in any position. I mean, the right state of mind. You've been outwardly violent to staff, and we are the first to take your rights away under the law. But you will see another doctor in the morning, and you will get your chance to put your point of view across. But if it happens again, like I know it will, it better not. Oh, no, not again. Oh, no, not again. You only see what you want to see. I'm not out of a textbook. This is me, Chad Copley. Give me a proper doctor who knows what they are doing and the consequences for their actions. It's my life now, and I make the rules. Oh, no, not again. Never again. Which is possibly one of the most honest pieces of writing I've ever encountered. But finding your voice and sharing your voice isn't just about life writing a memoir. One of my students said, I don't like writing in the first person. I'm not comfortable enough with myself for that. But I can write what I think as someone else. I mean, I'm the same. I don't write in the first person very often. I never write memoir, but my own life and my thoughts come in through my other characters. And it's a lovely way to do it. When I write something that makes other people laugh, I feel better. I know how good it feels to laugh. It keeps us going, yeah? So that's somebody who purely wants to write to entertain. And they do so very well, I must say. They've made me laugh many times. I don't know. I just like writing things like haiku and flash fiction. They're like puzzles, shut my brain up for a bit. So there's the intellectual value of writing and an ability to participate. I mean, I would add that a lot of these things are social as well, the idea of wanting to entertain others or to participate in that way. I like writing about things that are full of hope and good changes. It keeps me positive. This is another one I love. One of my favourite exercises, as any students of mine will recognise, is when I get out the feelings wheel, which is a therapeutic tool originally. It's part of CBT, I think, or DBT. But it's just a lot of different feelings arranged on a wheel. And there's a great exercise to do where you choose one of the less pleasant emotions and write about that for 10 minutes. And then you take the one that's opposite it on the wheel, which is a more pleasant emotion, and you write about that, and it can actually change your mood. Again, scientists have used their scans and synapses and proved that whatever emotion you're writing, you tend to feel. So writing is like telling myself bedtime stories. You can go anywhere in a story, the ultimate superpower. And that's a cue for this piece, which is from Virginia Seller Edmonds, about Miss Nicely. She's been writing Miss Nicely now for several years. It started off with one particular class, and it's turned into a lifetime's work for her. Miss Nicely's faithful steed, a flying sit-up-and-beg bicycle named Pegasus with an old-fashioned wicker basket, was straining at his bike lock, waiting for Letitia to climb aboard and direct him to where she wanted to go. Pegasus was the perfect form of transport for an elderly superhero. To all experiences, Miss Nicely was a straight-laced elderly lady with all the good habits of a thoughtful cyclist. She always looked before she pulled out and gave clear hand signals. She made sure to ride in cycle lanes and to respect road signs. Of course, she didn't spend much time on the roads, but still, smoothing her sensible coat and making sure that the laces of her sturdy brogues were tied, Miss Nicely mounted Pegasus and said, "Let's go then." So by giving my students the opportunity to learn about creative writing, to get the skills and confidence to be able to put the words on a page in the way that suits them and pleases their purpose, which is what I try to do with all my students, they gain a voice. They gain the ability to have one more voice in the world. And when they share their writing, nobody needs to know whether they're othered in any of these ways. They're a writer, and that's that part of their identity they can express through their writing. To help get more people to hear those voices, the Writing Tree helps Converge to publish an anthology every year. This is the same as the York St John Creative Writing Department does with their students. They write an anthology every year. I've actually got the cover of the one I was in up on the wall behind my computer here, because it meant a lot to me. So we're doing the same thing. We're giving them a chance to be read. And every year I ask them to write blurb for the back. So this is a cooperative piece written by my class to go on the book jacket for the last Creative Writing Heals, and it's the Amazon description as well. All the authors of this amazing book have one thing in common. They were courageous in their quest for something different. When the going got tough, they didn't give up. They just kept on going and arrived at Converge along the way. Every one of these pieces has been written by someone who had doubts, but instead of succumbing to their fears, they decided to believe in themselves. They embraced their passion for writing and stepped forward. And I would encourage you to do the same. A little bit about my next steps for research before we move on to questions. I'm really enthused about all this, and my employers have very kindly given me a bit of time next year to do a bit more of a rigorous piece of research on it to hopefully get published. So I'm going to do some case studies with my students to understand better how all of this works. I want to extend my research to Writers for Pleasure, so to my students outside of Converge, because I suspect it's probably not all that different, just different barriers and othering. I want to discuss those things with other people, and we have a conference coming up, which I'll talk about in a minute, which will be the start of that. Just spreading the word that writing for self is a good thing and an important thing, and can help to improve our relationships with society and our own well-being, and to make waves, because I do like to stir things up, and that's why I thought it might fit with this year's conference theme, because we need to push against the accepted boundaries of who can listen, who can be heard, and who can speak. There's an exercise there which you might want to do after the session, perhaps to finish off and to come back into your other world, and that's to write your own wave. So write anything you like that comes from your heart, that's your truth. It might be a worry you've got, it might be a thought that you had while you were doing the washing up, it might be your response to this session, It can be sad, joyful, ordinary, special. It can be fiction or non-fiction. But please, after this session, if you can, if you don't have to rush off to anything, take 10 minutes and write for yourself your truth. And that's the end of me talking. So I'd really like to answer any questions anybody's got. Amira says, is Converge only available to students at York St John or UK-based students? It's available to anybody who has lived experience of mental ill health. We're generally local to York, but with our online classes, we can go beyond York. The reason for our York focus at the moment is because a lot of our funding comes from the from TUV, which is the northern area of the NHS. We also have courses at Northumberland University, if anybody's up that way. We have a Converge there, and we have one in the United States too, at Oregon. Students there put on similar classes, and then they come over to us every summer and do a summer school for us. You can self-refer, so the Converge can be accessed via the university, the York St John website. If you go there, you'll be able to find a link to Converge and you can get in touch with our team. Can you please provide some more sources on hermeneutical injustice? I don't have any to hand. I have a few. I'm quite new to that particular discourse, so I'm a bit of a novice. I've read Fricker and a few others that she refers to, but there is more and more coming out all the time. So I suggest having a look in your local library or the university library, and perhaps a look online and have a look at Fricker and her references and take it from there. And keep an eye out for other conferences and events, because it is a topic of discussion at the moment. Glenn asks, when you started writing online, was it a blog? No, it evolved into a blog. I used to be on LiveJournal back in the day, which then got sold to Russians. It was quite difficult for everybody. But I used to write on specific forums. So I wrote for fanfiction.net in the very early days, which was the old-fashioned kind of forum style of thing. And then when that was taken over by somebody and they changed some of the privacy rules and things, I moved with a lot of other people to LiveJournal, and then it took on a blog as well. And then the archive of our own was created by fan fiction writers. Nearly all of 99% of them were women, which is also an interesting facet of fan fiction, which is perhaps for another talk. But they have invented a platform just for us to use to share stories. So that's where I've posted since then. I'm not going to tell you my username because I like to keep my academic and my fanfic writer person separately. But if anybody's thinking of writing online, I think doing a blog is a great way to start and to share your writing that way. Substack is a great platform to use for blog type writing that you can then use to build a group of people who are interested in your writing and then take it into interesting new directions. Oh, Richard's got an interesting comment. Richard says, I write to construct useful intentions. Yes, I do that sometimes as well. I try and do that once a month so I can kind of focus. My brain tends to go in all different directions, so I find that really helpful. There's if anybody's interested in that kind of spiritual edge of writing, there's a book called One Continuous Mistake by Gail Scher, who writes about writing from a Buddhist point of view, and she talks a lot about writing as practice. And I would also recommend reflective writing as well, just, reflecting on what you've written, reflecting on your day. All of those things are great practice, but also really good for your identifying areas that you may want to attend to within yourself. Okay, then I think we'll call it a day there. Do get in touch if you want to talk. And thank you for your lovely comments. You're very welcome, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed yourself. Go gently back into the world and take the best of words with you. And I hope to see you another time. Okay, that's everything. Thank you for now. Bye.